In a recent interview with Time magazine at the White House, President Donald Trump reflected on his first 100 days in office, addressing a range of significant topics including the economy, immigration, trade relations, and international conflicts. The interview, conducted by senior political correspondent Eric Cortellessa and editor-in-chief Sam Jacobs, provided insight into Trump's administration's approach to governance and his self-assessment of achievements thus far. Trump began the conversation by citing the challenges and successes of his presidency, emphasizing what he considers a strategic appropriation of presidential powers as opposed to an expansion. "The President of the United States is the most powerful person in the world," he stated, affirming his belief that he is using his powers as intended. Trump pointed to significant shifts in trade policy, claiming that the United States was previously losing approximately $2 trillion annually due to unfavorable trade agreements. He noted the recent fluctuations in the stock market, attributing these changes to his administration's efforts to rectify trade imbalances and bring in revenue through tariffs, specifically mentioning a 25% tariff on cars and steel. When pressed about his administration's authority over trade and other governmental bodies, Trump maintained that his actions align with his election promises. He defended his immigration policies as necessary to maintain national security, arguing that the previous administration's open border policies allowed dangerous individuals into the country. "We can't have that in our country," he asserted, reiterating his commitment to secure the borders through construction projects like the border wall. Transitioning to economic matters, Trump expressed confidence in the direction of the U.S. economy, highlighting decreases in the prices of groceries and energy while acknowledging persistent inflation pressures. He stated that the U.S. is currently collecting billions from tariffs, which he believes will foster a prosperous economic environment. However, he faced scrutiny regarding the sustainability of high tariffs and their impact on American businesses, particularly small enterprises that are struggling in the current climate. Trump reassured that his policies would ultimately benefit small businesses more than larger corporations. A focal point of the interview was Trump's ongoing trade war with China, where he described the complex negotiations and his expectations for future trade deals. While Trump indicated that he expects a resolution in the coming weeks, he also mentioned that any tariff reductions would hinge on substantial concessions from China. Reports surfaced that China has begun to ease some tariffs on U.S. goods, including semiconductors and pharmaceuticals, further complicating the narrative of escalating tensions. On the international front, Trump discussed his administration's stance on conflicts in Ukraine and the Middle East, asserting that he would have prevented the war in Ukraine had he been in office earlier. He claimed credit for fostering relationships with world leaders, suggesting that his unique approach could lead to peaceful resolutions in ongoing conflicts. Trump also touched on the situation in Gaza, attributing blame for the violence to the Biden administration's policies that, according to him, have emboldened adversaries like Iran. As the interview concluded, Trump reflected on his future ambitions, hinting at the possibility of pursuing a third term while reiterating that he is focused on delivering results for the American people. He remained adamant that his administration's policies would ultimately lead to a more prosperous nation, stating, "Our country is going to be strong again because of what we're doing." The interview encapsulated a moment of reflection for Trump as he navigates the complexities of governance amid ongoing challenges at home and abroad. As his presidency progresses, the ramifications of his policies, particularly regarding trade and international relations, will continue to shape the political landscape leading into the next election cycle. With many negotiations on the horizon and public sentiment fluctuating, the coming months will be critical in determining the trajectory of his administration's legacy. In a surprising turn of events ahead of the 2025 NFL Draft, President Donald Trump has publicly criticized NFL owners for their failure to select rising star Shedeur Sanders, the talented quarterback from Colorado and son of football legend Deion Sanders. Trump's comments, which he shared on his platform Truth Social, raise questions not only about Sanders' prospects but also about the broader evaluation criteria used by NFL teams in their draft decisions. What is wrong with NFL owners? Are they stupid? Trump wrote, emphasizing the genetic advantage he believes Sanders possesses due to his father's legacy. He continued to express his belief that Sanders is destined for greatness, urging teams looking to succeed to pick him immediately. This endorsement comes amid a heated debate over Sanders' draft status, where opinions vary widely among analysts and fans alike. As the first round of the draft concluded, Sanders had not been selected, even as some expected him to be a top contender alongside Kim Ward for the best quarterback title. The Pittsburgh Steelers passed on him entirely, opting instead for other players, which left many, including Trump, questioning the decision-making processes at play. Notably, ESPN's Mel Kiper Jr. has maintained that Sanders is indeed the best quarterback in the draft, although his critics argue he lacks the high ceiling that some teams desire. In addressing his supporters at a draft party, Sanders remained optimistic, stating, "I feel like with God anything is possible." His remarks reflect a resilience that many players must cultivate in the face of potential setbacks, particularly as the draft progresses into its second round. Speculation now surrounds where Sanders may land, with some analysts suggesting that he could continue to slide down the draft board, potentially trailing behind other quarterbacks like Tyler Shaw from Louisville. The unexpected nature of Sanders' draft journey, coupled with Trump's high-profile endorsement, highlights a dynamic intersection of sports politics and public opinion. As the NFL draft continues, the conversations surrounding Sanders' future are likely to intensify, especially regarding the criteria that teams prioritize when evaluating quarterback talent. In the grander scheme, this incident casts a spotlight on the NFL's draft processes and the sometimes unpredictable nature of player evaluations. As Sanders awaits his fate, the impact of Trump's commentary may resonate beyond the draft itself, influencing public perception and potentially affecting future scouting and drafting strategies. As the sports community watches closely, one can only speculate where Shadur Sanders will ultimately end up and how this experience will shape his burgeoning football career. In an exclusive interview with Time, President Donald Trump detailed the tumultuous first 100 days of his second term, a period marked by significant changes to both the aesthetic and functional frameworks of the White House and, more broadly, the American government. Trump, who recently returned to the Oval Office, has not only made superficial alterations to the decor, such as swapping presidential portraits and adding gold accents, but has also instituted sweeping and controversial policies that have drawn sharp criticism from a wide range of observers, including constitutional scholars, civil libertarians, and political opponents. As Trump navigated the corridors of power, he showcased a bold new vision for the presidency, insisting, "What I'm doing is exactly what I've campaigned on." This sentiment encapsulates his approach to governance, where he has taken decisive actions to reshape U.S. immigration policy, trade relations, and institutional authority. His tenure has been characterized by a series of executive orders and directives that have fundamentally challenged the traditional boundaries of presidential power. Central to Trump's strategy has been a flurry of executive actions that critics argue undermine the rule of law. He has leveraged his control over the Justice Department to initiate investigations against perceived enemies while simultaneously dismantling significant portions of the civil service, resulting in the dismissal of over 100,000 federal employees. This aggressive reorganization of the federal workforce is emblematic of a broader effort to consolidate executive authority, with Trump asserting control over independent agencies and ignoring judicial rulings that oppose his agenda. Trump's administration has also sparked outrage with its approach to immigration, launching mass deportation initiatives that have included the controversial use of a wartime provision to expel undocumented migrants without due process. In a particularly alarming incident, a federal judge criticized the administration for deporting a 2-year-old U.S. citizen to Honduras, highlighting a troubling trend of expedited removals and a lack of transparency in immigration enforcement practices. In a bid to reshape the global economic landscape, Trump's administration has initiated a trade war characterized by aggressive tariffs, provoking backlash from both domestic businesses and international allies. His fixation on tariffs stems from a belief that the U.S. has been unfairly exploited in trade agreements, a sentiment he articulated during his interview. "We were losing $2 trillion a year on trade, and you can't do that. While this approach has garnered support from some sectors, it has also led to fears of an impending recession as businesses grapple with rising costs and supply chain disruptions. Amid this whirlwind of policy changes, Trump has faced mounting opposition both within and outside of Congress. Many Republican lawmakers appear hesitant to challenge his authority, thus allowing him to push through his agenda with little resistance. However, signs of a burgeoning resistance are emerging as public discontent grows, particularly in response to the economic ramifications of his policies. Polling data indicates dwindling support for Trump, with his approval rating slipping to 40%, the lowest of any recent president at this stage in their term. Trump's administration has also taken aim at institutional powers that traditionally check presidential authority, including the judiciary and civil rights protections. The administration has issued orders that threaten to withhold federal funding from schools implementing diversity, equity, and inclusion programs, prompting a coalition of 19 states to file a lawsuit against these actions. Critics argue that such moves are part of a broader strategy to weaken organized opposition and consolidate power within the executive branch. As Trump reflects on his initial 100 days, he remains resolute in his belief that his presidency is a transformative force. He has articulated ambitions that extend beyond domestic policy, including controversial proposals for territorial expansion and a shift in America's foreign policy posture. His recent comments reveal a desire to reshape alliances and assert U.S. dominance on the global stage, even going so far as to suggest military confrontations over territorial claims. Looking ahead, the trajectory of Trump's presidency raises critical questions about the future of American democracy and the balance of power among its institutions. With each decision, Trump appears to be testing the limits of executive power, and the implications of his actions will likely reverberate throughout the political landscape for years to come. As both supporters and detractors brace for the next stages of his term, the evolving narrative of Trump's presidency continues to unfold, promising further developments that will redefine the contours of governance in the United States. In the ever-evolving landscape of global trade, the recent actions and statements by President Donald Trump have sent ripples of uncertainty throughout the world economy. As the president embarks on his second term, his administration's handling of tariffs has become a focal point of scrutiny, sowing confusion not only among international trading partners but also domestically among American businesses and consumers. On April 25, 2025, President Trump delivered yet another mixed message regarding his tariff strategy while departing for Rome, where he is set to attend the funeral of Pope Francis. While he indicated optimism about finalizing trade deals in the coming weeks, he simultaneously suggested that it was physically impossible to conduct the necessary meetings to achieve those agreements. These contradictions have left many in the business community and among foreign leaders questioning the coherence of U.S. trade policy. Since imposing tariffs as high as 145% on Chinese goods, Trump has faced backlash not only from international partners but also from U.S. companies grappling with rising costs and supply chain disruptions. In an interview with Time magazine, Trump claimed that any tariff rates of 20%, 30%, or 50% within a year would constitute a total victory. However, the immediate consequences have been alarming. The Federal Reserve's latest Beige Book revealed a marked increase in uncertainty among U.S. businesses, leading to a significant slowdown in hiring and investment. The ramifications of these tariff policies are particularly acute in key sectors. For instance, Ryan Peterson, CEO of Flexport, noted a staggering 60% drop in ocean container bookings from China to the U.S. since the tariffs took effect. Retailers are already notifying consumers of impending price hikes on everyday items, with some companies like Afina reporting stark contrasts in consumer preferences between imported and domestically produced goods, the latter often priced far higher due to tariffs. Foreign nations have also expressed frustration with the U.S. approach. Swiss President Karen Keller-Sutter remarked that while Switzerland would be among the countries engaged in privileged negotiations with the U.S., the process remains complicated and lacks a clear framework. South Korean officials have similarly urged the U.S. to lift tariffs to facilitate discussions aimed at reaching agreements by July. Despite the turbulence, there are signs that some nations are cautiously exploring tariff reductions. Reports indicate that China may be considering a rollback of tariffs on certain U.S. goods, including semiconductors and pharmaceuticals, although they have publicly denied any ongoing negotiations with the U.S. This development has sparked cautious optimism on Wall Street, with investors hopeful for a resolution to the ongoing trade tensions. However, Trump's rhetoric remains unpredictable. He indicated that he would drop tariffs on China only if substantial concessions were made, which further complicates the path forward. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent has also acknowledged the lack of clarity in the administration's strategy, stating that many foreign ministers are perplexed about the U.S. objectives regarding tariffs. As corporate America grapples with the fallout from these policies, companies like PepsiCo and 3M have already revised their profit forecasts downward, highlighting the tangible impacts of rising tariffs on their operations. The International Monetary Fund recently warned of a likely slowdown in economic growth, attributing part of this risk to the uncertainty created by Trump's trade policies. Looking ahead, the chaotic nature of Trump's tariff strategy raises critical questions about the future of U.S. trade relations. With significant negotiations on the horizon and the administration's recent moves reflecting a precarious balance of power, businesses and consumers alike are left to navigate an environment fraught with unpredictability. As the world watches closely, the potential for further escalations, or a much-needed de-escalation, remains a pivotal issue that could shape the economic landscape for years to come. In recent weeks, the Pentagon has found itself in a whirlwind of controversy and leadership upheaval centering around Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth. The scrutiny of Hegseth's tenure has intensified following reports of sensitive military information being shared in unsecured group chats. This has prompted the White House to consider potential replacements, as infighting and allegations of leaks have led to the resignation or termination of 5 senior advisors. On April 25, 2025, the Pentagon announced the promotion of 4 new senior advisors amid this chaos, including Colonel Ricky Buria, Justin Fulcher, and Patrick Weaver, along with Sean Parnell, the Pentagon's former chief spokesman. Parnell has been elevated to assistant to the Secretary of Defense and senior advisor, a role that will require him to navigate the complex dynamics within a beleaguered department. The changes come as Acting Press Secretary Kingsley Wilson described the personnel adjustments as a routine aspect of any efficient organization. However, the abrupt removal of key staffers, including Hegseth's Chief of Staff Joe Casper, raises questions about the stability and effectiveness of leadership within the Pentagon. Hegseth himself has been under fire for his management style, which sources have described as erratic and increasingly insecure. Reports suggest that he has resorted to public appearances, particularly on Fox News, in an effort to project an image of strength directly to President Trump, who has been critical of Hegseth's handling of sensitive information. The internal strife has created a tense atmosphere at the Pentagon, with officials reporting instances of yelling and hostility among Hegseth's senior staff. Allegations of leaks have further complicated matters, leading to the dismissal of several advisors who were implicated in a leak investigation. Those dismissed expressed disappointment over their abrupt departures, claiming that they had been unfairly characterized and that their professional reputations were tarnished without just cause. The fallout from these personnel changes is significant. With a diminished staff and no identified chief of staff, Hegseth faces challenges in managing the enormous responsibilities of leading a department that oversees approximately 3 million personnel, including military forces stationed globally. The lack of experienced leadership could hinder the Pentagon's ability to effectively respond to pressing national security issues and legislative demands. Democratic lawmakers, along with some Republicans, have voiced their concerns about Hegseth's fitness for the role, suggesting that his replacement may be necessary to restore order and credibility at the Pentagon. Notably, Hegseth has not held a press briefing since assuming office, a departure from the norm for someone in his position, further isolating him from congressional oversight and public accountability. As Hegseth grapples with these mounting pressures, revelations about his unorthodox communication practices have emerged. Reports indicate that he installed an unsecured internet line in his Pentagon office to facilitate the use of the Signal messaging app, which poses significant security risks. This disregard for established protocols exacerbates concerns regarding his capacity to safeguard sensitive information. Looking ahead, the situation at the Pentagon remains fluid. With the White House actively seeking new advisors to stabilize Hegseth's administration, the potential for further changes looms large. The evolving landscape within the Department of Defense will undoubtedly influence national security policies and the overall trajectory of U.S. military readiness. As the Trump administration continues to navigate these tumultuous waters, the focus will be on whether Hegseth can regain control and restore confidence in his leadership, or if a new direction is inevitable. In a moment that promises to be as politically charged as it is somber, world leaders are converging on the Vatican this weekend for the funeral of Pope Francis. The event marks a pivotal moment not only for international diplomacy but also for the Biden administration, which faces the unique challenge of addressing the presence of former President Donald Trump at the service. As Trump embarks on his first international trip of his second term, the atmosphere is rife with tension, particularly given his contentious history with many leaders in attendance. The backdrop of this gathering is fraught with complexity. Trump's foreign policy, characterized by an America First doctrine, has strained long-standing alliances and led to a series of diplomatic spats, notably with European allies. His administration's imposition of tariffs, the ongoing conflicts in Ukraine and Gaza, and a hardline stance on immigration have all contributed to a climate of uncertainty and unease. The papal funeral, therefore, could serve as a diplomatic minefield, potentially igniting confrontations in front of the world's media. Pope Francis, who often challenged Trump's policies, notably criticizing his stance on immigration as sowing fear, will be memorialized at an event that could see Trump at odds with various leaders. Among the notable guests is President Joe Biden, who has had a fraught relationship with Trump yet shares a deep reverence for the late Pope. This dynamic could lead to uncomfortable exchanges, particularly if the two engage directly, having not done so since Biden's presidency began. Adding to the intrigue is the possibility of Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky attending, despite military obligations that might keep him away. If present, it would mark a reunion with Trump, who previously criticized Zelensky during a tense meeting at the White House. Recent developments have only exacerbated tensions, as Trump has suggested recognizing Russian control over Crimea, a proposition that has alarmed Kyiv and raised questions about U.S. commitment to Ukraine's sovereignty. In the midst of these complex dynamics, Trump's appointed special envoy to the Middle East, Steve Witkoff, is also making headlines. Witkoff, a Trump loyalist with no formal diplomatic experience, has been tasked with negotiating resolutions to long-standing conflicts, including the Russia-Ukraine war. Critics have dismissed him as ill-prepared for such high-stakes diplomacy, while supporters argue that fresh perspectives are necessary to break from entrenched foreign policy failures. His recent proposals, which some view as leaning pro-Russian, have sparked debate about the efficacy of his role and the broader implications for U.S. diplomacy. While Trump's presence at the funeral is likely to overshadow the proceedings, it is not without its supporters. Some European leaders, including Italy's Giorgia Meloni and France's Emmanuel Macron, have fostered positive relations with Trump, suggesting that not all interactions will be hostile. However, many in attendance harbor criticisms of Trump's policies, notably Brazil's President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva, who has openly contested Trump's tariffs. The Vatican has taken extensive security measures for the event, reflecting not only the significance of the occasion but also the potential for disruption. As Trump prepares to navigate this delicate landscape, the world will be watching closely. His past behavior at international gatherings, where he has clashed with leaders and made headlines for his unfiltered remarks, leaves many wondering how he will conduct himself during this solemn occasion. Ultimately, the funeral of Pope Francis will serve as a litmus test for Trump's approach to diplomacy and his ability to engage with leaders who may not share his views. As the political climate continues to evolve, this event could signal new directions for U.S. foreign policy, the implications of which will likely resonate well beyond the walls of the Vatican. As world leaders gather to pay their respects, the intersection of grief and geopolitics promises to unfold in dramatic fashion, setting the stage for potential future alignments and confrontations on the global stage.